It began with a single letter slipped under the door. At first, it looked like the usual stack of junk mail advertisements, coupons, and bills, but this envelope was marked with the HOA's seal. The homeowner, a hardworking father named Mark, assumed it was something routine, perhaps a reminder about community events or landscaping schedules. But when he opened it, the contents made his stomach drop. The letter accused Mark of violating HOA guidelines by parking his truck in his own driveway. The board claimed that oversized vehicles were prohibited, citing vague rules about aesthetic harmony. What stunned Mark most wasn't the warning, it was the fine. Effective immediately, he was being charged $500 a day until the vehicle was removed. At first, he laughed in disbelief. Surely this was a mistake, a clerical error that could be sorted out with a phone call. His truck wasn't some abandoned rust bucket, it was his work vehicle, essential to his small contracting business. Without it, he couldn't earn a living. But as the days passed, more letters arrived, each one harsher than the last, each one stacking fines higher and higher. By the end of the first week, the fines totaled more than his monthly mortgage. Mark felt trapped, suffocated by rules that seemed designed to break him. He reached out to the HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman, who dismissed his concerns and insisted that the rules were non-negotiable. The board members echoed her sentiment, smugly reminding him that he had agreed to abide by the regulations when he bought the house. Mark's wife grew increasingly anxious as the fines piled up. Their savings account, carefully built over years of hard work, was draining rapidly. What once seemed like a safe and comfortable home had transformed into a financial nightmare. Every knock at the door carried the weight of another demand, another notice, another threat of legal action. At night, Mark couldn't sleep. He sat in his truck, parked defiantly in the driveway, staring at the darkened windows of the neighbors who had turned a blind eye. He wondered if anyone else had been targeted, or if this campaign was aimed squarely at him. The truck wasn't loud. It wasn't unsightly, it was just convenient for the board to use as an example. He considered selling it, but the thought filled him with dread. Without his truck, he'd lose contracts, his business would collapse, and his family would be left with nothing. But if he kept it, the fines would continue to snowball into an unpayable mountain of debt. The HOA's strategy was clear. They expected him to give up, to bow to their demands, and quietly remove the truck. Yet something in Mark resisted. He wasn't the kind of man to back down without a fight. And then, one late evening, as he combed through the thick HOA handbook that most homeowners ignored, he noticed something odd, a clause buried deep within the fine print. It was small, almost an afterthought, but it caught his. Mark sat hunched at his kitchen table, the HOA handbook spread open under a yellow lamp. The document was bloated with legal jargon, a maze of rules designed to confuse. But in the margins of a long section about parking regulations, he found one overlooked line that didn't fit with the rest of the restrictions. It read, "Work vehicles used for the resident's primary income shall not be considered recreational or oversized." His heart pounded. His truck wasn't a recreational vehicle. It was the backbone of his livelihood. By their own rules, the HOA's fines were invalid. They had been exploiting his ignorance, counting on him to fold before ever reading the fine print. The next morning, he made copies of the clause and attached them to a letter addressed to the HOA board. He wrote calmly but firmly, pointing out that his truck was exempt from fines. He expected resistance, but part of him believed the board would back down once the oversight was exposed. Days later, he received their reply. The letter wasn't an apology, it was an escalation. The HOA dismissed his interpretation, claiming he was twisting the meaning of the rule. They doubled down, insisting he owed thousands in fines and threatening to place a lien on his home. Mark realized then that this wasn't about rules, it was about control. The board's arrogance ran deep, and they weren't going to admit fault. If he wanted justice, he'd have to fight for it. He began collecting every notice, every letter, and every photo they had sent. He organized them neatly in folders, building a case. He even spoke to neighbors who had quietly faced similar harassment, recording their testimonies. The more he dug, the clearer it became. The board operated like a private dictatorship, bullying anyone who dared to question them. But Mark had something they didn't: patience, determination, and the truth in black and white. The battle lines had been drawn.
The HOA responded with aggression. A uniformed officer arrived at Mark's door one morning with paperwork filed by the board. They were seeking immediate legal action to recover unpaid fines. It was intimidation, pure and simple, but it only strengthened Mark's resolve. His wife worried constantly. The threat of losing their home hung over every conversation. Bills went unpaid, credit cards piled up, and the stress seeped into every part of their lives. But Mark couldn't give in now, not after discovering the truth. At the next HOA meeting, he showed up uninvited, binder in hand. He sat quietly until the board began boasting about their enforcement successes. Then, with steady hands, he placed copies of the handbook clause on the table. The room fell silent. Some residents raised eyebrows, whispering among themselves. For the first time, cracks appeared in the board's armor, but instead of acknowledging their mistake, the president smirked and brushed it off. She accused Mark of being disruptive, claiming he was wasting everyone's time. When he refused to leave, she threatened to call security. The humiliation stung, but the moment also revealed something important. Not all the residents supported the board's iron grip. Some looked sympathetic, even grateful, as if Mark had voiced the frustrations they had kept bottled up. Outside the meeting hall, one neighbor pulled him aside and whispered encouragement. Others sent emails later that night, sharing stories of unfair fines and harassment. Suddenly, Mark wasn't alone, he was the spark of something bigger. The HOA had picked the wrong fight.
Armed with evidence and growing community support, Mark contacted an attorney specializing in HOA disputes. The lawyer was blunt. The HOA had overstepped, and their case was weak. With the clause in the handbook and testimonies from neighbors, Mark had more than enough to fight back. They filed a countersuit, arguing not only for the dismissal of the fines, but also for damages caused by harassment and emotional distress. The lawyer advised Mark to remain calm and let the process unfold. But the HOA board panicked. They sent frantic letters, desperate to collect money before the case reached court. Their tone shifted from confidence to desperation, but Mark ignored them. As weeks passed, the lawsuit gained traction. Local media caught wind of the story, intrigued by the idea of an HOA fining a man into bankruptcy over a work truck. Reporters began circling the neighborhood, asking questions. The once untouchable board members found themselves dodging cameras and refusing interviews. The irony was bittersweet. The very fines meant to break Mark had instead exposed the board's corruption to the entire community. And with every headline, more neighbors rallied to his side. Mark had gone from victim to symbol. His fight wasn't just about a truck anymore. It was about standing up against abuse of power.
The courtroom showdown was nothing like the HOA had envisioned. Their attorneys tried to paint Mark as a reckless rule breaker, but the loophole clause was undeniable. When the judge read it aloud, the board's arguments unraveled. Neighbors who testified added weight to the case, describing years of unfair treatment and hidden agendas. The courtroom buzzed with tension as one by one, the board's secrets spilled out. The judge grew visibly impatient with their evasions, and eventually, the ruling was clear. The fines were invalid, the lien was void, and the HOA owed restitution. The board's authority crumbled overnight. Several members resigned in disgrace, while others faced lawsuits of their own for mismanagement of community funds. Residents who had once stayed silent now spoke openly, demanding accountability. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive again, free from the oppressive shadow of those who had abused their positions. Mark and his family finally felt relief. The truck remained proudly parked in the driveway, a symbol of resilience and victory. But even as the dust settled, Mark knew the story wasn't finished. Because power never disappears, it only shifts.
Months later, the community elected a new HOA board. This time, residents chose members who valued fairness and transparency. The rules were rewritten with clarity, removing loopholes that could be exploited against hardworking families. Mark was offered a position on the board, but he declined. His battle had taken too much from him already. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his business and enjoying quiet evenings with his wife, free from constant fear of another fine. Still, his fight left a lasting legacy. Neighbors referred to his case as the turning point, the moment when the HOA's grip was broken. His name carried weight in the community, a reminder that one person's determination could bring down an entire system of intimidation. Mark often looked at his truck with a sense of pride. What once felt like a burden had become the catalyst for change. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was the reason he discovered the strength to stand against injustice. In the end, the HOA's attempt to fine him into submission had backfired spectacularly. The loophole he uncovered hadn't just saved his family, it had saved the entire neighborhood. And so, the story of the 500 a day fines became a cautionary tale, retold whenever a new resident moved in. A reminder that sometimes the smallest overlooked detail can topple the biggest bully.